WebEx or, whatever platform it is that we're using, but the technology presents some challenges as well. And so knowing how to mitigate those, knowing where to look, for example, when you are being interviewed, you need to look into that camera. And I'll take my video and I'll bring myself back here so that you can see me, and I'll keep my fingers crossed that the internet connection works here. But when you're doing an interview, you need to be looking into that little camera that I'm covering up there at the top right now. And the reason is when you do that, you are looking whoever is on the other side of that camera in the eyes. And I always get this. I do a lot of trainings on Zoom for law firms or for accountants or for sales teams who are learning how to pitch and how to sell on camera. And they always say, I want to look into the monitor. And it feels weird because when I'm looking into the camera, I'm not looking at anybody. And that's true. It does feel weird. And you're not looking at anybody directly in front of you. But what you are doing is you are looking at the person on the other side of the camera in the eye, and they don't see any of that awkwardness. They don't see that you feel weird that you're not looking in the monitor and looking at them. All they see is you looking them in the eye. And that is one of the easiest ways to establish a connection and a rapport, especially with someone that it is likely you will never meet in person, at least not in the foreseeable future. So to answer your question, Kenneth, and I realize that was a little bit of a run on there, but it depends on where you find yourself. Are you asking the questions? Are you answering the questions? Are you part of a video podcast? Are you being interviewed for a job? Your audience is really what indicates how you handle that situation. And then you calibrate your authenticity and yourself for what that audience needs.
Let me open it up at this point. If anyone has any questions and they want to unmute themselves, take advantage of Kerry and her absolutely great background. Ask whatever you like.
Is your background? And if you guys do have questions,
is your background original, or do you have a virtual?
It's my actual house. This is my couch and my windows, and I'm in a sunroom. So my background is real.
All right, I'm going to say post your questions in the chat also. I think that might be easier for me to follow. We have one of the questions that I guess I was dying to ask you is, do you get nervous before you are interviewing someone, and is it normal to feel that way?
It's 100% normal to feel that way. Absolutely. And I don't get nervous any longer. I have interviewed politicians and celebrities with giant egos and everybody in between, from business owners to, financial luminaries and academics, the whole 9 yards. And in the beginning, it was nerve-wracking. And it was nerve-wracking because you're asking somebody who has prepped almost their entire life for whatever topic it is that you are talking about. You've brought them in because they're an expert in some way about this particular topic that you are questioning them on. And so they have had decades of experience, and you've had maybe, if you're lucky, a couple of days to research them and that topic. And so if it is an aggressive interview, or if it's an interview where you can expect some pushback, then yes, it's nerve-wracking. Number one, you don't want to look stupid. And number two, you want to make sure that you're serving your audience. These days, no, I don't get nervous. I was on air for 20 years, 6 hours of live TV a day. I made all my mistakes, the really bad ones, in front of millions of people already. So I enjoy now getting on camera and doing interviews because the premise is usually quite different. And I find it interesting, and I find it stimulating to talk to people. I do not get nervous, but it is absolutely 100% acceptable and normal for somebody who is not in the habit of A, interviewing, and B, interviewing on camera, to get nervous. It takes practice.
One question: what are the one or two things that we should do to be prepared for an interview, or to say anything?
Okay. So there's a couple of things that you should do to be prepared for an interview. And I'm going to take this question, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm going to take this question as somebody who is preparing for a job interview. And right, so if you have questions outside of that, by all means ask. But in order to prepare for a job interview that you are going to be interviewing for virtually, something like this, you're on some sort of video platform. Number one, this goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway. Do a little research on the company that you are applying for, and or two. And I don't mean just their mission and their goals. I mean, look into their culture, because you can reflect some of that culture in the way that you present yourself on camera. Is it a casual company? Is everybody pretty buttoned up? What do you see when you research the bios of the people who are already employees, or who are already team members or leaders or managers at that particular company? You will get an idea for the feel of the company, the vibe and the culture, by reading those bios. And you can then calibrate. I'm not going to say change, because you don't want to change who you are, but you want to be authentic, but you can calibrate your message to whoever is going to be on the other side of that camera. So researching the company is incredibly important. The other thing that I would say to be prepared for when you are doing a virtual interview are the tech issues. And we've all experienced them for going on 7 months now. They've gotten, I don't know, worse in some cases, I think. And in order to be properly prepared for those sorts of issues, you need to have a couple of things going on. Number one, you should try and be hardwired if you can. I realize many of us do not have hardwire internet anymore. I'm on Wi-Fi, and that's why my video was a mess in the beginning as well. The other thing is that if you find that you are doing an interview and your video starts to freeze, or their video starts to freeze, cut your video like I did. It'll free up some bandwidth, and let them know either in the chat or in an email. If you can't communicate, I'm having issues. I'm still on the computer. Do you want to make this a call instead? Having a plan for the tech issues shows that you've prepared, that you know what the challenges are when you are meeting potential clients and other employees online, because that's how most of us are going to be working for the foreseeable future. And you are ready, and you can hang, and you're going to be a good addition to the team. It also shows how you handle stress. So if you can handle those situations clearly and calmly, you've already demonstrated probably one of the big personality traits and characteristics they're going to be looking for, which is, how does this person deal with stress? Because we are under an inordinate amount of stress, and it's different stress than we're used to. So you have these sort of subtle things that you can do throughout the course of your interview, that you're not just telling them I handle stress well, but you're showing them that you've prepared and that you can actually handle it when it happens to you. Having a tech issue can actually be a big bonus if you handle it well.
Great answer. So how do you prepare to ask questions in an interview, and what kinds of questions do you ask? So even from a job seeker perspective, you may know about a little bit about the company, but how would you determine it in ahead of time what you ask whether you're speaking with someone or in a job interview situation?
So there's a couple of things, and it goes beyond doing a cursory look at their website. It involves going onto the LinkedIn profiles of not only the person that is interviewing you, but any other names that you can come across who you may be interacting with, or who are making the decisions at that company. Go to their social media sites, go to their LinkedIn profile. If the company has a page on LinkedIn, go to that as well. And my experience during interviewing is that there always is something that pops up that really is a natural question that makes sense to ask. If you heaven forbid you can't find that moment, you need to have a couple of things that are prepared to go. And so that's not what's your vacation policy or anything like that. That's not the question to ask in the first interview, but they are questions perhaps about how do you foster team cohesiveness with the virtual setting that we find ourselves in? How does your onboarding process differ now that we are in a virtual setting? And I'm assuming they're virtual if you're interviewing virtually. How do you establish team team cohesiveness? Those are all questions that are important for you as a potential new employee, but also give you a little bit of education about how that company and that business has adjusted to working in a virtual environment. How do they create additional virtual networking events or team building events, or let's go around and meet the team sort of events? Because all of those things, listen, I'll give you an example. If you are in a company, or you're looking to get hired by a company who already has, let's say, 5 people who have worked very tightly for the past, let's say, 7 years. And now all of a sudden you are the new guy or the new gal in town. And we've got this 6th person coming into the fold who nobody has met in person, nobody has seen in person, nobody has spoken to, probably on the phone. How are they going to make sure that you are integrated into that team? And it's not just about, I want to make sure that I'm included. It's, I want to make sure that we all work well together. And that's how you phrase it. So I would be prepped to answer questions about how that company works in a virtual environment. They'll be important not only for you integrating into the team, but making sure that the team works well together and that the company culture and the mission continues to grow.
Great. What's the most challenging aspect of interviewing? How do you deal with this challenge to be successful?
Boy, that's a good question. I have never actually applied for, I have been interviewed by video podcast hosts and radio folks and TV stations, all since going virtual and since starting my business, but I've never applied for a job and been outside of a client, I suppose. I want a client to work with me. Technically, I'm applying for a job with that client. So how do you prep? Is that the question?
Well, here's the thing. Let's talk about it from an interview perspective.
Okay.
You mentioned before, when you go for an interview, you want to do your due diligence.
Yeah.
But at the same time, what are you also preparing for? You're preparing for how to handle a question that might be coming out of left field, let's say. So how do you think about that? Do you sometimes think about what you're going to say before you answer a question, let's say, or I mean, some of those best practices? Or...
Yeah, I'm going to answer everything that you say with, it depends, which I realize could get old really quick, but it kind of does. And so, sure. Do I know what the general questions are going to be? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Tell me a story about how you overcame this. How did you, those questions you can plan for. And while I never suggest rehearsing them word for word, your talking points, or you should. If you don't know them, do a little more research on that, or think about that a little bit more. You know what your sound bites are, right? I like to sort of create a sound bite around each talking point that I'm going to be bringing up. And what I mean by a sound bite is it's, 15 to 30 seconds that if that interviewer doesn't remember anything else that you said, they're going to remember that. And that alone is what is going to, make it to all of their managers when they go around and talk about you as a potential candidate, because this was so great and it was so memorable. So sound bites, talking points, your stories. Certainly you are more than your LinkedIn profile. You are more than your resume. What are those stories about your professional, or in some cases, personal life that show what you bring to the table, and sort of craft them, right? Stories are the things that sit with people. You can talk about, how you blew the previous sales manager out of the water when it comes to, sales, and you knocked them dead Q2, Q3, Q4, the whole 9 yards. But if you can create a story around that, and I don't mean something false, but I mean something that ties into people's emotions, that's going to sit with them and highlight and amplify those statistics, if you will, even further. So talking points, stories, and sound bites are always important to have ready to go. And those are the things that you bring in out almost any interview that you go to. When it comes to a question that you're being asked that is sort of out of left field, there's a couple of things you need to be aware of. Some of them are unique to this virtual platform. Okay, so I never like to sit in silence on a virtual platform unless I have indicated I am going to sit in silence for a minute in some fashion. The reason is that the person on the other side, right? We all have to take this video thing into context. If they ask you a question and you sit and ponder for a moment, there's a good chance that they think you haven't heard them because of some technical snafu. And so if I'm asked a question that I need to think about, I need to also think about what I'm speaking through. I'm speaking through this video medium. So I will say, you know what? Buy a little time. It's a really good question. I hadn't thought about it in exactly that way, but when you phrase it, whatever the question is, I believe that you've bought yourself a little time, and you've also not left that dead air. And dead air is one of those things that you have to be prepared for when we're dealing with this, technical, I want to use the swear word here, but I won't. This technical poop show that we find ourselves in on the daily. And so you need to take that video stuff into context, right? For example, if I'm doing an interview with somebody and I'm looking over here and I'm actually taking notes because nobody can see what's going on outside of this little box, I could be doing anything over here. There's no context is what I'm getting at. And so I could be on my phone, I could be doodling, I could be doing anything. So if I'm doing something out of frame that my interviewee or interviewer cannot see, I make note of it. Hey, I just have some notes here. I'm not distracted. I'm not tuning you out. I'm taking some notes just so you know what I'm doing. As you're interviewing, you always have to take this video component into consideration, because there's a lot that we take for granted with regular communication, in-person communication, that we cannot take for granted when we are communicating on video.
So one question came up. Loving the way you're using your hand gestures and pacing yourself. Is that something you might consider on a video interview too when you're on the other side, just for extra just to kind of put yourself out there? I mean,
emphasis? Sure. I got to tell you, Kenneth, one of the questions that I get most often when I am training somebody, either for being on camera or public speaking, is what do I do with my hands? And my answer is always the same. Use your hands as you would when you are naturally speaking. Unless you are doing something wildly distracting that has zero relevance to what you're saying, like that, then use your hands as you would in regular communication. There are a few reasons for that. Number one, if you are framed and positioned correctly in your little video box here, you're not going to see a ton of your hand movements anyway. I know I keep referring to this and you see my hands there, but I'm emphasizing what I'm saying. Generally, when I'm using my hands, they're out of frame. So if you're positioned correctly, you're not going to see a ton of that anyway. The second reason is that if people become so focused, and I've seen this with people somewhere along the line, someone has told them they shouldn't talk with their hands. And so they become focused on keeping them stone, still. And it ends up stilting the rest of your communication. You become so focused on that one element that the rest can sound kind of rote or canned or like you're on autopilot. It becomes stilted, I guess is the best way to say it. And so if you're using your hands and it's appropriate hand gestures that amplify what you're saying and you talk with your hands, then go ahead and talk with your hands. There's no reason that you shouldn't. It will help amplify your message. Again, as long as you're not doing something that's just, extraneous movement for no intent or purpose.
Is there a creative way to make an impact on the interviewer? Like show the company logo in the background or wear the company's colors?
Okay. It depends. There's a couple of reasons that I say that. Number one, I think that right now there is no stigma to this work from home environment, right? Barring any sort of like inappropriate pictures or titles on your bookshelf behind you, that work from home stigma is gone. And if your work from home background is pleasant and there's a little bit. Listen, I'm going to tilt my computer here so you can see, right? I have some personal effects in the background. I've got pictures of my kids. I've got some awards back there and other things. Those sorts of things show your interviewer a little bit, they're like a window into your personal life. And so that can actually be quite appealing. It can also be a conversation starter. I tend to not like to put the company logo behind me. If I'm interviewing at, Acme Widget Maker, I'm not going to put an Acme Widget Maker logo behind me. My opinion is that you look like you're trying too hard and you look like you're selling too hard, and people don't want that right now. They want a conversation, and you're going to get a much more authentic and real idea of who the company is, and the company's going to get a better idea of who you are through conversation. I'm not a huge fan of the virtual backgrounds in general, and there's a few reasons for that. I have seen hundreds of them. I've seen maybe 3 that aren't awful. And the reason that they're awful is they generally are pretty canned, they're pretty corporate, they're pretty bland and whitewashed. And the technology is not great, meaning, and we've all seen this, I'm sure, if you move around or somebody moves their hand, it takes a second for the virtual background to fill back in, and you can see, whatever it is behind them, or it looks like part of their head's cut off, or their hand becomes a fist or a claw. They're sloppy, for lack of a better word. I always say if somebody has a really bad background, a natural background that they absolutely hate, they're shooting in a closet because it's the only place they have to do a video or to take a video call, then what you should consider investing in is an actual green screen. You can buy one on Amazon for $30. Yes, it requires a little more behind the scenes work, but it is so much more crisp. I shoot videos for clients for digital ads, and I'll shoot them here on my laptop with a green screen behind me. They can superimpose any sort of image that they want, and it's crisp and it's clean. And so, for example, I'll use my news background to highlight what I'm talking about. When you see a weather person standing in front of a map and they are gesturing at the temperatures or the highs and the lows and whatever the case may be, you think about how crisp and clear that image actually is. That's not because there's a map behind them, because they're standing in front of an actual green wall, and that image is superimposed on that wall behind them. So if you must use a logo or you must put something behind you, I suggest buying an actual green screen and creating something. It's maybe it's your name and your email and your other contact information that's next to you, or it's just a plain blue or white background. But long answer to your question, I feel very strongly about virtual backgrounds. Most of them are not good.
Thanks a lot. So Alex Freund is on the call. I know Alex also wanted to chime in with a few best practices too.
Okay, Kerry, I happen to be in the same business as you are, except at the other end. What I do, I help people and I train people prepare for interviews.
Mhm.
And earlier on, you talked about uh, you were asked how you prepare an individual. That's what I do most of the days.
Mhm.
And actually, I prepared a document here, which I share with my clients. It's right here. And I tell them, you see, the problem that I see is this. Most people go for an interview, none of them like and enjoy it. And the problem is they had bad experiences, or they know that they are rusty. And the last time they interviewed was 8 to 11 years ago. And they don't know what question they will be asked. So to overcome that is very simple. Prepare.
Mhm.
And this is a list how to prepare. And I'll read very quickly for the benefit of the other people here. You need to learn about their history. When established, is it private? Is it public? Their people, who are the top 2, 3 people? What is their value? What is the stock market? How about the culture, philosophy, reputation? Who are their competitors? What are the products? What are the services? What is the direction of the company? And a lot about the interviewer. You see, once you prepare this, these are the questions, and this is where you need to fill in the answer. Once you have these answers, and an hour before the interview, you read this 3 times, now you're prepared for the interview and the fear has gone away, and now you're able to talk because doesn't matter what you ask, I already have the information here.
Right. Absolutely. I think the camera throws people for a loop as well. It's a new element that even if we interviewed 8 years ago, the chances are we did an interview on a video. And that can be especially challenging, not just for the tech issues, but also most of us don't like being on camera. You know, we find it distracting and we find it nerve-wracking and intimidating. Bringing both of those elements together, prep for the questions and prep for your on-camera delivery, which is quite different than an in-person delivery, make for the best outcome. Absolutely.
Kerry, when you see me on your screen, do I look now at the camera or I look at you, which actually is the answer? I look at you on my screen. Does it seem that I'm not looking at you because I'm not looking at the camera?
Yes.
Okay, how about now?
Yeah, it still looks like you're looking slightly down, and that may be because your camera is a little lower than eye level, but
Actually it's not. You see, I'll tell you this. I'll show it to you. I have these little gadgets, you know, that I put under, and I elevated it and I matched it with my eye level. I match it with my eye levels. Actually, it's perfectly aligned. And I'm surprised that I'm not looking at you.
yeah, are you looking at, or what are you looking at now? Are you looking at the monitor?
No, you are about an inch below the camera. You're on the top line, about an inch below the camera. And you still say that I'm not looking at you.
You're not, because you're not looking at the camera.
Yeah. Okay. Now I'm looking at the camera. Can you see that?
I can see the difference, although maybe it's where my camera is. It still looks like you're looking down a little bit. Is your camera an external, or is it part of your computer?
Part of the computer.
And are you on a laptop? I'm assuming
Yes, I
you're
am.
on a laptop. Yeah. And you're looking down at the monitor now.
No, actually, I'm looking at you. You are just about 1 inch below the camera on my screen.
So you're looking at your computer monitor, which is where my face is. You're not looking at the camera though. So for example, can you see me?
Yes.
Okay, so the difference between, I'm going to take my glasses off just in case there's a reflection, and I'm sorry for getting up in your face. I don't have any makeup on right now, but right now I'm looking directly into my camera, and and even though your face right now is about 1.5 inches below the camera, when I shift my eyes from the camera down to you, can you see the difference?
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah, but it's so difficult to look at that little thing, that camera. It's very, very difficult. You need to be a professionally trained person.
To look at the
To do-
camera?
Yeah, or to have a teleprompter so the camera is behind it.
Well, the teleprompt, there's a couple of things. If you are doing it, unless you are familiar with using a teleprompter, it is a tricky thing for people to pick up and not sound like they're reading. It sounds very scripted for most people unless they are in the habit and know how to read off of a teleprompter, and they know how to space their words and how to create pauses that are part of natural conversation, right? Usually it becomes, hi, I'm an operations manager with extensive experience. I'm reading something in the chat, but you get the idea. As far as being professionally trained in terms of looking at the camera, I wouldn't say necessarily that you need to be professionally trained, although certainly I do help people with that. But one of the things that is incredibly beneficial, that is also extremely painful, and I know this from personal experience because I had to go back and watch tons of videotape of myself when I was a news anchor, and I always hated it. 20 years into my career, I still hated it. I hate looking at myself, and I hate listening to myself. Most of us do. But going back and watching, even without somebody guiding me on best practices, just going back and watching the tape makes such a huge difference. And so if you can sit down in a Zoom, room or whatever and record yourself and then go back and watch it, you will find all sorts of idiosyncrasies and quirks, if you will, in your delivery that can only be picked up by watching it back. And so one other tip that I sometimes give my clients if they're really struggling is I just have them put a little sticky note underneath that camera with an arrow that goes right up to the lens. And so it's that constant reminder that that's where your focus needs to be. But you're right, it takes a lot of practice, Alex.
Kerry.
Linda Trigano.
Can I make just one more comment, and then I'll shut up, promise.
Okay.
So forgive me. The reason behind me, I have this artificial background, is because as soon as I'm done here, I'm testing out a new product, which I already tested once. I want to do it one more time. It's an interview with the camera, not with a human. Mm-hmm. And there is a software that is measuring your eye contact. And then it's giving you a numerical value, how many times you made eye contact, head engagement, speaking rate, filler words, how many filler words are you using, even number of smiles, tone of voice, emotions, to what extent your voice has emotions, and frequent word count, how many times you use a certain word.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a new product. I'm going to test it. I already did it once. So I am now in conversation with the owner. I'm fascinated.
Sounds amazing.
It is. A question?
I have a statement, Kerry, that I just want you to help me understand, because I also train people how to interview. But I think with video, what happens is we tend to look at the person's face. We judge a lot, and that habit does us in sometimes with video interviewing. Yes. It's hard to look at somebody's face and get the nuances and still look into the camera. So help me understand how somebody interviewing can best handle that.
I appreciate that question, Linda. Thank you. And it is always the follow-up to the question about where do I look when I'm speaking, because you're absolutely right. One of the challenges of video communication is all of that nuance and context that we get from the nonverbals and from the facial expression, and how are they seated in their chair, and is their foot tapping underneath the table, or all of that stuff. We miss all of it. A lot of it anyway, when we're doing video. And that's just one of the challenges that we have to figure out how to mitigate. And so here's what I advise people. If I am doing, again, it depends. It depends on how many people are involved. If I'm doing, sometimes I'll host a summit. Okay. I'll give you a little sort of backdrop, and it's me and somebody else having a conversation, but there's an audience of 400 people who are also watching. And so if I'm having a conversation with, I'm asking questions of somebody, as I am speaking, I'm looking in the camera. As that person is speaking or answering my question, that's when I'm looking at their face. And the reason I can do that then is because they're speaking, they should be looking in the camera. So they're not seeing as closely where I'm looking. And I can start to try and recoup some of that lost context and some of those lost nonverbals. Where that changes further is if I'm watching that person speak, so I'm looking down at you right now, Linda, and if you're speaking, let's say you've been speaking now for 3 or 4 minutes, I want to re-engage with the audience. I want to make sure that the audience hasn't, doesn't think that I've forgotten that they're there. So every now and then, as you're speaking, Linda, I will look back up into the camera. I will nod my head. I will smile. It's a bit performative, but it's part of what we need to be aware of as we're communicating on camera. Smile, nod, and then go back down to watching you speak. It's similar to what you will see a news anchor do. And I'll use again a news example. If you watch somebody, I can't think of anybody without, I'm not going to pick a Democrat or a Republican. I'm going to pick some random person who let's say you're watching Sally, your local news anchor, and she is having a conversation on the desk. And then so-and-so from the local barbershop pops up on the camera with her, and they're doing an interview, but he's, or she's over at her store. When you watch them talk side by side, they're looking in the camera. They're not seeing each other. They're just looking in the camera. Every now and then, they'll do the same thing. They'll look down into the monitor and they'll try and glean some of those nonverbals. And then they'll look back up and they'll re-engage the audience who is watching this interview play out at home. So you're really actor, producer, and director when you're in this environment. And you have to be aware that it's not just you speaking. There's another person, and there's very often an audience. So for example, Kenneth and I are speaking at this, on today's LinkedIn Live. However, there's an audience of an additional 68 people who are also watching this. So even if Kenneth and I are having a conversation, I need to be aware that the rest of you are also listening and watching. And I need to make sure that I'm engaging with you as well. Does that make sense? Again, a long answer, but I hope it provided a little bit of clarity.
I think it's critical for job seekers to understand that back and forth business.
Yep, absolutely.
That really helps them.
Absolutely, Linda, and I appreciate the question. It's so tiring. The camera aspect of this can be really exhausting, and part of it is because there's a sort of a cognitive dissonance, right? I can see that there's 70 people here, 68 people here outside of Kenneth and I, but I can't really see any of you, right? I can see a few of you in the gallery view at the top, but I know you're there. So that is a little bit draining and exhausting. And then, as I mentioned, you are playing actor, director, and producer. You have to be aware of all of these elements and how they come together. And by the end of the day, and I know you're all with me on this one, I'm ready to collapse. It's exhausting. And this is coming from somebody who had a 20-year on-camera career. So my hat's off to all of you for taking another video call today.
If I may, Kerry, I think there's a part of it where you have to learn to keep your head in a certain way, but that you use your eyes to look around, even though you're training your head to stay in a certain position.
So a couple of things to that. I would agree with you, Leonard. There is what I don't want people to, so I call it the camera stare, and it's where you're so stuck into watching the camera that you fail to use the other nuances of your conversation. It's normal every now and then to break gaze when you're thinking of something, or to look down to gather your thoughts. Those are all natural parts of communication, and they should be used as we're in a video environment as well, or a virtual environment as well. The one thing that, I tend to use my hands, and I tend to use my face, and I tend to move around. There's a couple of elements. So standing stock still or sitting stock still is not normal. If you're positioned well enough within that screen, within that video box, if you will, you should be able to move a little bit and not move entirely out of frame. Not that you want to be swaying back and forth constantly, because that's distracting as well. What I find is helpful and inviting to the audience is I lean in. When you lean in, right, and I don't mean like up in your face like that, but when you do lean in, it is an open sort of gesture to your audience. It's a way to bring them in and a way to bring you into their world. It's one of the things that they taught us back when I was a young cub reporter. Don't move side to side as much, but if you want to engage your audience with natural body movements, it's moving in, because you're bringing yourself closer to them. So again, practice. I would agree with you. You shouldn't be doing too much side to side, but standing stock still is not natural either. It's all a matter of calibrating your true presentation style with a way that works on camera for your audience. And take some practice.
Hey, Kelly, thanks for the really fantastic observations. I just wanted to touch on the fact that your lighting is spot on. It's perfect. I struggle, I've got all sorts of devices and light sources, and as the day changes, your lighting moves around, and you have it just like nailed, so that we of course look at you and say, oh, of course, that's how we're used to consuming video. We're used to seeing that, And I also noticed that you don't suffer too much of, you and I are both wearing glasses, and there's that, oh, where do I get because if I look up, I'm going to get a glare, and then you lose the eye contact, right, that I'm trying to make. So I have to kind of a little bit be aware of that. But what kind of lighting secret is going on behind there?
Well, so I will tell you, I have 3 lights, and I wish I could show you, but if I spun my computer around, I'd make you all sick.
Yeah,
so
we
I'll
don't
tell
get
you
dizzy.
a couple of things. I have
It's 3. Okay.
I have this wall of windows here, right? On the other side of my computer, I also have a wall of windows, almost floor to ceiling and wall to wall. I'm in what is essentially the sunroom. My husband owns the other office. So I got stuck in this place, which is not a bad spot to be. But I have natural lighting in here, which is a huge benefit. And it's one of the reasons I set up my computer this way, because I knew that I would have natural light in front of me. So a couple of things. If you have whatever the brightest light source is in the room in which you are taking your video call, or doing your virtual event or whatever, that light source should be in front of you, should never be behind you. And if the brightest light source in your room is light in your ceiling, it should never be directly above you. Outside of that, right, I live in a very wooded area. Recently, the leaves dropped. And so the light in my room has changed just from that. It's much more direct, and it's not as diffused as it used to be. I have a ring light that is in front of me and to my right. I have another set of lights here, and I have another set of lights here. They're all a daylight temperature, which means they're a neutral light. They're not cool and they're not warm. So the light temperature is all the same. And additionally, my ring light, you mentioned the glasses glare, and I get that question a lot. It's not perfect, and you're right, you do have to be aware. But what I have found to work, aside from an anti-reflective coating on my glasses, is that my ring light is actually up and to the side. That means right. I'm not getting that direct. So if you have that glasses glare, it's usually a matter of repositioning your light so that it's not directly in front of you. There's other things that you can do, but that is the easiest and most solid way to fix that issue.
Right. I've gone through a lot of those. So you talk about color. See, here's my ring light, temperature changing. If it goes away altogether, I turn, you lose me altogether.
Right.
So all those things are, but the way you've done it is really fantastic.
It looks like you have a pretty bright light to your right. Is that a window?
Yeah, that's right.
Is that the brightest light source in the room? And could you configure
Well,
yourself?
yeah, so I'm surrounded 3 ways
Uh-huh.
with lights, but of course my desk is attached to the wrong wall,
Oh,
and
yeah.
everything else is windows, so I have thought about moving myself around a little bit. But
There is one quick suggestion. You can buy for not too much a dual ring light that actually stands on your desk. You put it behind your computer, assuming you have room, and it's got two, I guess they're probably about 8 to 10 inch
Right.
in diameter ring lights, and they come up on either side, which really helps if you have, it helps even out the lighting if you have one particular side. Like I can see that whatever is on your right-hand side, and it may just be because you're sitting closest to that window, appears to be the brightest.
right.
And so it may take a little extra gear to get your lighting exactly where you need it to
Yeah,
be.
and also time of day has
That's
an
it.
impact.
Yep.
Yeah.
It changes all the time.
Yeah.
By the end of this thing, we are all going to be lighting
Oh,
experts. That much
yeah.
I can tell you. If we've lost our job, we should be able to go to Hollywood and say, I am a lighting expert and I can make this happen for you.
Kerry, would you be willing to have conversations with people as follow-ups or?
Of course.
So, I mean,
Absolutely. So I'll put my, I did it once off the top, but I know that some of you may not have been in the Zoom room or in the call prior to that. I put my email in the chat. I would be absolutely delighted. I always offer a free 30-minute strategy session anytime I am on a live or on a webinar, whether it's for lighting or gear or camera presentation or DIY marketing videos. By all means, please reach out. I would be delighted to have additional conversations with any and all of you after this.
and make sure to put your LinkedIn URLs in the chat if you'd like to. We have time for a few more questions, but I wanted to make sure, Kerry, that you put that out there.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I'll put my website in there too.
Sure.
Other
Kerry,
questions?
can I
Yeah,
ask a question?
of course.
Hey, how are you? Barrett.
Well, how are you?
I'm good. So quick question here. I actually have a job. Thankfully, I got a job a couple months ago. I've been working. It's only a contract job, but don't get me wrong. Yay, I have a job. And it's a little bit, on the flag here. I am working as a government worker, so I had decided it was a good idea to just leave it up there.
Are you trying to distract yourself from today?
No. I'm actually working. I have 2 screens. The upper one had, you were that little box about that big in the corner while I was listening and working all at the same time. So my question really is that in a situation like this, where I am working and I'm listening to a call like this, how wrong is it to close my camera?
When you
Because
are
if I'm working, I'm going to look up at this screen, I'm going to look at this screen, I'm going to look at the piece of paper, which means I'm not looking at you. I don't want to distract you.
Right. So we've dropped down to about 63 participants now. So I'll use that number rather than the old one of 70. But all I see along the top of my monitor, I see myself, I see Kenneth, I see Simone, Paul, Linda, and Leonard. Hi, Simone. Probably because all of them except Simone have asked me questions. I actually did not see your video box pop up until you asked me a question. And so and you're gone. So my answer to this is a little bit dependent upon your role in the meeting. If you are a team leader or a manager, or you have to have an active role, you shouldn't have your video off.
Well,
right?
I would think that this is more of I don't know that I'd have my camera closed on a work call.
Right.
Or on
Something
a thing like this where I'm
have it off. That's totally fine. Most people can't see that your video box is off anyway. And in fact, if I scroll through my gallery view, well, now you're all there. Except there's a few people who have their video off, and that's fine. And you know why? It's probably because they're doing other things as well, but they wanted to listen. And so if you're not in a super active position, or you're not in in a role in that particular meeting that requires your constant input and monitoring, having your camera off is fine in my book. I'm an adjunct at Kane University. I teach public speaking. We're not actually allowed to ask our students to turn their camera on because it's considered an invasion of privacy. And I realize that this is a different environment here, but if you're just listening to a call, half the time that the meeting host will have your videos off anyway.
I can
So
tell you when it comes to my role, cameras are all off.
they're all off.
No,
There you
no
go.
cameras on.
Yep. Yeah, I think it's, if you're listening, turn it off, and that way you can get some work done as well.
All right. Well, I can say I do remember you on TV.
Oh, thanks. Thanks for watching. I appreciate
You're welcome.
it.
One reason could be to preserve bandwidth as well.
Absolutely, 100%. I will say this. If you do not have a profile picture populated in your Zoom profile, if you don't have a picture in your profile, a headshot, I would do that. And there's the reason, one of the reasons is because we're all dealing with challenges when it comes to working from home. You know, we don't like it, but there is always the possibility that someone is going to ring the doorbell and you are going to have to answer it. Otherwise, your dog is not going to stop barking. Or there is, I have 3 kids, 3, 6, and 9. There's a good chance without that slider lock on the top of my door that they would come barging in here. When you do cut your video, if you have a profile picture in your account, it will automatically populate that profile picture into your video box, assuming that your host has allowed you to do that. And that does a couple of things. Number one, it lets people know that you're not gone. You're still there. They just can't see you. And if you are meeting with a new team or maybe a new client, or you have a new boss, it allows them to continue to make that connection with your face and your name, even though they're not seeing your video at that particular moment in time for whatever reason. I always suggest that people have that ready to go.
I've even seen people use animated pictures of themselves
Yeah.
as replacements.
Like a cartoon type picture?
Oh, no. A true photo or a film sequence.
Got it. Yep.
Video sequence. So you see someone sitting there and then you see suddenly they've moved. And they start doing
Because it's on a loop.
Yes.
Yeah. If you do that, make sure that it's edited well.
Oh, the way you do it is first you film it forward and then
Yeah.
you put in another clip that you reverse.
And you go back.
Yeah.
There you go.
Thank you very much, Kerry. I really, really appreciate you
Yeah.
sitting down today.
My pleasure. Thank
Great.
you so much for inviting me and having me on here. And I appreciate all of you guys who are watching from your offices or your work from home environments. I know that we're probably all video platformed out, but I really do appreciate you showing up. And I would be delighted to talk to anybody offline or after this call if you have any questions that I can help you walk through.
Thank you.
Take care.
Absolutely.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Great. Thanks, Kerry.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kerry and Ken.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay,
Yes.
thanks.
Thanks so much.
Both. Thank you.